Yo, Alejandro VI, siervo de los siervos de Dios, al queridísimo hijo en Cristo Fernando y a la queridísima hija en Cristo Isabel, ilustres reyes de Castilla, León, Aragón y Granada, salud y bendición apostólica. Y haciendo uso de la plenitud de la potestad apostólica y con la autoridad de Dios omnipotente que detentamos en la tierra y que fue concedida al bienaventurado Pedro, y como vicario de Jesucristo, a tenor de los presentes, os donamos, concedemos y asignamos perpetuamente a vosotros y a vuestros herederos y sucesores en los reinos de Castilla y León, todas y cada una de las islas y tierras predichas y desconocidas que hasta el momento han sido halladas por vuestros enviados, junto con todos los dominios, ciudades, fortalezas, lugares y villas, con todos sus derechos, jurisdicciones correspondientes y con todas sus pertenencias, y a vosotros y a vuestros herederos y sucesores os investimos con ellas y os hacemos, constituimos y deputamos señores de las mismas con plena, libre y omnímoda potestad, autoridad y jurisdicción. Nadie, pues, se atreva, en modo alguno, a infringir o a contrariar con ánimo temerario este documento de nuestra exhortación. Si alguien, pues, se atreviese a atentar esto, sepa que incurre en la ira de Dios omnipotente y de los bienaventurados apóstolos Pedro y Pablo, dado en Roma junto a San Pedro en el año de la encarnación del Señor, 1493, el día 5 de las nonas de mayo.
Señor presidente, nosotros, como descendientes de los pueblos indios de Abya Yala, miembros del Consejo Indio Exterior adheridos a CAPAG, con estatus consultivo del Consejo Económico y Social en las Naciones Unidas, queremos expresar con meridiana claridad cuál fue y sigue siendo la médula donde nace el racismo español. Esta se produce con la intervención en mayo de 1493, donde los reyes católicos acuden al Papa Alejandro VI para que mediara a favor de la corona española y les concediera la donación de las tierras de Abya Yala a América por medio de una bula papal. Es desde ese momento histórico que comienza el racismo en su más alta expresión, ya que Alejandro VI dicta las bulas de donación de nuestras tierras a los reinos de Castilla. Conocida como la bula papal intercaetera, hizo de Isabel y Fernando, reyes de Castilla, dueños y señores de nuestras tierras con todos los privilegios, constituyendo estas un acto de soberanía con implicaciones de muerte y genocidio que jamás fueron reconocidas por la monarquía española. No existe en la historia de la humanidad un acto de destrucción y muerte de millones de hermanas y hermanos en nombre de la corona que aún perdura, aunque disfrazada de democracia. Nuestra memoria histórica no nos permite dejar en la impunidad el genocidio cometido por la corona española. Y por ello, desde el Comité de Racismo y Discriminación de las Naciones Unidas, solicitamos a los miembros del comité que inste al Estado español a pedir perdón por el asesinato cometido contra nuestros pueblos y la derogación de la bula papal intercaetera que aún sigue vigente. Mientras esto no ocurra, nosotros, los pueblos indios de Abya Yala, no ejecutaremos la ceremonia del perdón.
is Kowanes. My English name is Tonya Frichner. I'm a citizen of the Onondaga Nation, and I'm founder and president of the American Indian Law Alliance, located here in New York City, where we're filming. We're a non-governmental organization in consultative status with ECOSOC at the United Nations. I am originally from Onondaga, which is located about 300 miles, a little less, northwest of here, in the central part of New York State. The Onondaga Nation is part of a confederacy of 6 nations. Onondaga is referred to as the heart of the confederacy. That is where the fire is kept. The traditional name for ourselves is Haudenosaunee, and it means the people of the Longhouse. The Onondaga Nation is one of the few places left within the borders of the United States that still has in place our traditional government. In other words, our government has not been replaced by a law which is referred to as the Indian Reorganization Act, based very much on the United States system. Our traditional form of government has been in place for a very long time. The Great Law had a great deal of influence on the founding fathers of the United States, those that are referred to as the founding fathers, who thought about this concept of democracy and participation in government, and spent a great deal of time among our people, among our leaders, sat in our councils, met with our leadership, met with our people, so much so that many of the founding fathers could speak fluently back and forth with our people. Benjamin Franklin could speak Mohawk. Thomas Jefferson had a very strong interest in linguistics and was fascinated by our language. When you spend that much time with the people, you begin to understand their thinking, their way of life, and that way of life is referred to as our Great Law. It is a blueprint of how humanity should survive and how we should survive within the natural world, that we are part of the natural world, not something that dominates it or is over it. I'd like to share with you the way of life and the participation of our women within the Haudenosaunee. That is what I know, that is what I can speak to. The Haudenosaunee are a matriarchal people. You carry your clan, your extended family with you, and that clan is determined by your mother. So the women hold the heredity, the clan in the nation. They are the heart of the nation that keeps us together, always. The clan is what you are born into. It is your extended family, and the women take care of the clan. The leader within the clan, or the leaders, are referred to as a clan mother, a chief. In our language, it would be oyane. And the chief has a sub-chief, someone that works with him, that takes care of the clan. And out of that expands the Haudenosaunee and who we are as a people. Our leaders, our chiefs, sit in council, which is referred to as the Council of Chiefs, the Grand Council of Chiefs, and they are our conduits in government. We give them the message, they bring the message to the circle. They work for the people, they represent the people. They do not speak for themselves, and their authority does not come from them. It comes from what the people give to them. Our leaders are leaders for life, and their responsibility is very enormous. They are not paid for these positions, and they are expected to be available for consultation on a one-to-one basis, consultation in government on a 24-hour basis. So it's a very strong responsibility that our leaders carry with them. But they have great vision, and the people give them that leadership, and it's something I don't think the Anglo-American, the European American understands about indigenous peoples, that you cannot anoint yourself a leader, that leader comes from the community. And usually that leader is very reluctant and says, oh no, I'm not too sure I can do this. But the people know who those leaders are going to be and who will represent them properly, with a good mind and in a good way. Now, leadership within our tradition is not just the men. The men have a particular responsibility, and part of that other half of our world, and those two halves make a whole, the men and the women. Part of that other half is the female. Our women have something that the United States would refer to as suffrage. In other words, we have direct participation in government. We initiate the selection of our leaders, and we also have something referred to as the power of recall. We have the ability to begin the process of removing a leader from his office if it is determined by the people that he is not doing his duty in a good way. So our women are working directly with the men in an equal way. It's like the message of life. You cannot have one without the other. They complement each other, and they work together. And that's how our people move forward and have been able to keep our way of life and our traditions together in such a strong way. Our women being the heart of the family, the heart of who we are, have always held on to that. And I think for 500 years it has been the women who have made sure that we are still here, that our ceremonies, our languages, and our ways of life are still going to be here 500 years from now. I mean, because if you look at just North America, all right, it doesn't make sense that after and over 500 years of contact, that indigenous peoples would still be here. It just doesn't make sense. The overpowering of indigenous peoples has been so strong that I believe the Europeans probably felt that we would not last and we would not be around. But our attachment to this earth, because we are one with this earth, one with this place, our hearts and the heart of Mother Earth beat together. That there's no taking that away. And of course, the struggle has been trying to deal with everything that gets thrown at indigenous peoples constantly. The loss of our language, making it illegal to speak your language, illegal to conduct your ceremonies. When you take those away, as every indigenous person will tell you in the world, you're losing who you are. You're no longer who you are. Interesting that the colonizer would do that first when coming to our territories, remove our language. You cannot do your ceremonies without your language, and you can't stay together as a people without your ceremonies. So our women still hold that strength of nationhood that keeps us together. And they make sure that our territory and our land is still still intact. We may have lost a great deal of it, but we still have something that no other people within the borders of the United States have, and that is land. And that is, in my opinion, the basis, right, the litmus test for why we have problems with each other, why our people have difficulty with the federal government, with the local governments, with the state governments, because we have something that nobody else has, and that is our land. And we have the resources underneath that land as well. And when you look throughout the world, right, indigenous peoples, even though we have been removed to some very isolated places, and maybe 100 or 200 years ago, those governments who were taking away our land believed that by removing our people to a place that was isolated, nobody wanted to live in that area, was totally worthless. It's sort of come around full circle that now you have indigenous peoples throughout the world struggling to hold on to their land because there are natural resources on that land that the colonizer needs to keep up this outrageous movement of development. Because you cannot have development without resources. And sooner or later, you're going to run out of resources. Resources are finite. They don't last forever. And dealing with that question of what do you do when the resources run out? How do you get to those resources when you have a people sitting on that land that belong to that land, that own that land? The relationship in the United States with indigenous nations is on a nation-to-nation level. Right? United States will say that the relationship is on a government-to-government relationship and level. It will say that the federal government has plenary power over Native nations. But I would challenge that. I would like to know where in the United States Constitution the federal government has been given the authority to have plenary power over Native nations. It doesn't exist. Right? So there's always that constant struggle of authority, of plenary power, of who owns the land, where does the land go back to, natural resources, and the theft of our lands. We have something here within the borders of the United States called treaties, agreements, contracts that were made between Native nations and the federal government. The first thing the federal government did as a very new country after the Revolution was to make treaties of peace and friendship with Native leadership, especially the Iroquois Confederacy or the Haudenosaunee. The U.S. as a new government was in a very fragile state, had no money, couldn't feed its people, couldn't pay its soldiers, began giving away the land that did not belong to them, right? And also began to make treaties very quickly with Native nations. It knew enough that it wasn't going to last as a new country because it was so fragile if it did not make treaties of peace and friendship with those Native nations that were very powerful and very large in numbers. It would not last as an entity. Now those treaties talked about several things, and they're all different types of treaties. 371 to be exact, that were ratified by the United States Senate, so they are law. There were over 500 treaties made, even when the federal law said you could no longer make treaties. The United States continued to make treaties. Those treaties talked about, in exchange for indigenous land, there would be the protection of our people into the future. Our health, our education, and the welfare of the people would be protected as long as the water flows and the grass grows, and all of that language that we have heard over and over again throughout history. Now, our people took those treaties very seriously. Unfortunately, the United States violated each one of those ratified treaties, 371 as I mentioned earlier. They also took land from indigenous peoples in an illegal fashion. So Native nations have been fighting over the years, for hundreds of years, about bringing back our traditional lands and challenging the United States. Indigenous nations within the borders of the United States have been challenging the theft of their land by the United States or by states themselves for many, many years. They have gone to federal courts, the United States Supreme Court, many, many times looking for justice, looking for equity, looking for fairness. Many times they have lost, many, many times have lost those cases and have gone home empty-handed. Many of these traditional leaders have talked to each other and decided, say 30, 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, that a new approach needed to be taken. That maybe going to the international community and talking about these issues would be the way to seek justice and to seek equity, because it wasn't happening back in their countries, or the countries that had colonized them. So with this great vision, amazing vision that indigenous leaders had in this Western Hemisphere, from North America, from Central America, from South America, was to go to the international community, specifically the United Nations, to seek redress and to talk and share what these issues have been, and hopefully bring back to their people some sense of equity and justice. So our folks have been participating in the United Nations process for a very long time, actually since the early 1900s, and more recently in 1977, up until the 1980s, when a working group on indigenous populations was formed, and until recently, when a permanent forum on indigenous issues was formed in 2001, under the authority of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, moving to a much higher level than the working group on indigenous populations. Bringing issues such as human rights, environment, children, women's issues, issues around our elderly, you name it, bringing those issues forward and telling the world community what is going on indigenous territories, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, in New Zealand, all over the world, in Russia. These forums have become so strong, so powerful, that thousands of indigenous peoples come to these meetings each time they're held. And because of the dedication of people with great vision and people who are leaders in their community, governments have not been able to ignore what Indigenous peoples are saying. That governments must look at these issues and must take it seriously, and must look at things such as adopting a declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples that will have repercussions for Indigenous peoples in a good way throughout the world. Indigenous peoples taking the leadership, especially in the South, in Central and South America, under something referred to as ILO 169, talking about how our people should be treated by governments, with businesses, with transnational corporations that come into our territories and challenge our land, challenge our people, take out our resources, and looking at the international community for some redress, to look at these issues in a very, very serious way. And over the years, so many of our young people have begun to learn 2 languages, not only their own language, but the language of other governments, the language of the colonizer, if you will, and studying their laws, studying how the laws in the countries that they now live operate, so that our people are becoming very fluent and have really always had to be fluent in 2 languages in order to survive, and in 2 ways of life in order to survive. But we have some very astute minds who are now in those international forums challenging governments such as the United States for saying no to Indigenous peoples, that you don't have human rights like every other peoples in the world, and making them address why, making them answer those questions. What do you mean Native people in this country have only internal self-determination? What do you mean? Isn't it a form of discrimination when you say, United States, that Indigenous peoples don't have human rights just like everyone else? They skirt the issue, and our people are now, and have been for a long time, challenging those positions. When you take a position that follows the law, follows the Charter of the United Nations, follows the covenants that most governments have signed based on human rights, it's very difficult for governments to come forward and sort of answer that question directly. Indigenous peoples can now no longer accept that we don't have human rights just like every other person in the world, that we don't have the right to self-determination, to the expression of our ways of life. This is no longer acceptable. And anything less is racist, and anything less is discriminatory. And now we need governments to come forward and explain to us in a very clear way, with a clear legal argument, as to why those laws do not apply to us. And this is what Indigenous peoples have been doing in these international forums, because it does go back to what's happening in our local communities. The international work impacts our local communities very, very strongly. If our people's human rights are being violated and challenged on a local level, then we need to address that. If governments have signed on to covenants, have signed on to the Charter of the United Nations, they cannot violate those charters, they cannot violate those covenants on a local level. And that is the message that we are bringing back to our local communities on a daily basis. That yes, When our women are sterilized without their permission, that is a human rights violation. When our people's culture is being taken away, then we need to talk about cultural genocide. We need to address all those international issues that other human beings address on a daily level in the international community. And that's what we are doing. I think some of our leaders, such as Tony Blackfeather, who recently passed to the spirit world last month, this was very important to him. And I personally feel an obligation to keep this work going so that that seventh generation that hasn't arrived yet can have a life in a good way based on our original instructions, and to have a life that is acknowledged and respected by the rest of the world.
We note these changes are exactly in line with proposals from a number of member states, as they look to impose greater restrictions of who can speak and who can attend a permanent forum. It is becoming evident that some member states want us to be seen and not heard. This new process of not allowing Indigenous peoples a voice at the permanent forum is the continual practice of the mindset of the doctrine of discovery and the practice of rights ritualism. More importantly, it creates an oppressive and pejorative atmosphere. We assert that the doctrine of discovery and its practices are still alive and well. The policies and practices of many member states reflect this in their statements and actions. This was no more evident than during the high-level plenary meeting known as the World Conference on Indigenous Issues, and here at the Permanent Forum. The Permanent Forum was created by Indigenous peoples for the purpose to voice our opposition to egregious human rights violations. We remind the Permanent Forum that it was in fact under the request of the Permanent Forum that we as Indigenous peoples and Indigenous nations make collective statements through caucus interventions in an effort to express collective views under a single intervention. We are all here as Indigenous nations and peoples to unite and speak for ourselves in the international arena at the United Nations. Our voices and concerns are important, and we are people equal to all other peoples, and as such, have the right to be heard in the international fora. And in the spirit of honoring my Aunt Tonya Frichner, I feel compelled to remind everyone here of our mandate as Indigenous peoples and our responsibilities to Mother Earth and to the next 7 generations. We have a responsibility to speak for things in the natural world that do not have a voice: the water, the air, the plants, the fish, and the four-legged. They are screaming, and they are not being heard. When Indigenous people's voices are stifled, so are theirs. We formally request an explanation and documentation of the decision-making process that created this change in procedure. Indigenous peoples have the right to be included in any proposed changes that may affect our participation in the processes of the United Nations. There is a need to develop a process for the implementation of the Permanent Forum's recommendations, as we are currently relying on member states to do the right thing. We must begin with a full implementation of the UNDRIP by member states and the United Nations system. We are not inherently opposed to changes in the process of the work, only the lack of transparency and the lack of full, equal, and effective participation. We agree that reforms are needed to propel this work forward. But in closing, as my uncle, Onondaga Nation Faithkeeper Oren Lyons always says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Thank you very much for all your good work, to my brother Shannon and to the other co-chairs, and a sincere thank you for the man that helped really make this possible, and that's our brother Kenneth Deere. So please express your gratitude to our brother for the
Miigwech Hey,